When I first moved to Hawkins, I didn't really know anyone. It was one of those small towns where things move slower than you're used to, and if you're new, it can take a while before you start feeling like you belong there. I had just gotten settled into a small apartment on the edge of town, and like most people who move somewhere new, the first thing on my mind was finding a job. After a couple weeks of applying around, the only place that called me back was a security company that handled night patrols for a few office buildings in the area. It wasn't exactly the kind of work I pictured myself doing, but I needed the money, and honestly, the idea of working quiet night shifts sounded pretty easy at the time. That was until my first week on the job. This was sometime in the late 90s, and I had just started training on the night shift. The building they had me stationed at was an older office building downtown that was currently going through some renovations. The main lobby area was still under construction, so most of it was blocked off from the sidewalk with heavy plastic tarps and temporary barriers. Part of my patrol route was to walk through that lobby every hour or so just to make sure nobody had slipped inside and started messing with the equipment or stealing materials. The first few nights were pretty uneventful. Just quiet walks through empty hallways, the hum of old fluorescent lights, and the occasional creaking noise from the building settling. Apparently that had already happened once before, so they were pretty strict about checking it. Since it was my first week doing night security, I'll admit I was already a little on edge walking through empty buildings at midnight. Something about offices after hours just feels different. During the day they're full of noise and people moving around. But at night they're dead quiet. Every little creak or sound echoes way more than it should. One night during my training shift, sometime after midnight, I started one of my routine patrols through the building. Most of the floors were dark except for emergency lighting, and by the time I reached the lobby area, the place felt especially empty. The renovation had made it even worse. Plastic sheets hung from parts of the ceiling, tools were scattered around, and the new revolving door they were installing at the entrance was only halfway finished. The tarps covering the front entrance blocked most of the street lights outside, so the lobby itself was almost completely dark except for the beam from my flashlight and a couple dim construction lights. I stepped through the taped-off section and slowly swept my flashlight across the room the way I'd been trained to do. Everything looked normal. Stacks of drywall against one wall. A ladder leaning near the unfinished revolving door. Nothing moving. I started walking toward the center of the lobby when something caught my attention above me. At first it was just a shape. Something hanging from one of the metal support beams in the ceiling. I lifted my flashlight toward it, and the second the light hit it, my stomach dropped. There was a man hanging from a rope. He was suspended from one of the beams directly above the construction area, dangling there completely still. He looked like he was wearing a dark suit, and his head was tilted slightly forward. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide open. And for a few seconds, it looked like he was staring directly down at me. I completely froze. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing while my body just locked up. The beam from my flashlight was shaking in my hands as I kept it pointed at him. The rope was tied tight around the beam above him, and his body was hanging about 8 feet off the ground, swaying slightly in the still air of the lobby. The entire building suddenly felt 10 times quieter. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My first thought was that someone had broken into the building and done that to themselves. Or worse. For a moment I just stood there staring up at the body, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do. Then the flashlight beam shifted slightly as my hands trembled, and the light hit the man's face more clearly. That's when something about it started to look wrong. The skin didn't look real. The eyes looked too glossy. And the rope itself looked strangely clean and perfectly tied. I slowly stepped a little closer, keeping the light on it, and then it finally clicked in my head what I was actually looking at. It wasn't a real person. It was a life-sized mannequin that the construction crew had hung from the beam as some kind of sick prank. The rope was just a piece of thick cable, and the mannequin was dressed in an old suit someone must have brought from home. For about 5 straight seconds though, I was absolutely convinced I was staring at a real dead body hanging over my head. Once the realization hit me, I just stood there in the middle of that dark lobby feeling my heart slowly calm down. But I'll be honest, even after I knew it was fake, I still didn't like the idea of standing under it. I finished the rest of my patrol pretty quickly that night, and the next day when I came in for my shift, the mannequin was gone. Apparently one of the supervisors made the construction crew take it down after hearing how badly it freaked out the night guard. Even now, I still think about how real it looked in that moment. And how in a quiet, empty building at midnight, seeing something hanging from the ceiling above you is about the last thing you ever expect. Most people assume that when you work security at a corporate office building, especially a financial one, the job is pretty boring. You sit around for hours, maybe do a few patrols, drink some coffee, and wait for your shift to end. And most nights, that's exactly what it was like for me. But there was one night during the winter that still sticks with me. And even though I dealt with far worse things while working as a sheriff's deputy, that night managed to scare me in a way I didn't expect. At the time, I was picking up extra money working weekend security at a local branch of a massive investment firm. My shifts were always from 4 p.m. to midnight. The facility itself sat on about 4 acres of land and had 3 separate buildings spread across the property. The whole place was gated off, and it sat at the very edge of an industrial park, right up against a pretty rough neighborhood where break-ins and shootings weren't exactly rare. There were always 2 guards on shift at a time, and because it was a financial building, those of us with the proper certification were allowed to be armed. Since I was already a deputy, I carried during my shifts. Most of the time the job was simple. Patrol the buildings, check doors, watch cameras, and make sure nobody tried to get onto the property. This particular night was sometime in December. The offices were covered in Christmas decorations. A lot of the employees had left little bowls of candy or treats on their desks for us as a thank you for keeping an eye on the place during the holidays. It was a small thing, but when you're walking through empty office halls for hours, those little reminders that people appreciate what you're doing actually help. The other guard working with me that night happened to be someone I knew from the National Guard. That alone made the shift feel easier. We both knew each other's training, and we trusted each other to handle things if something actually went wrong. Around 10:30 that night, I was doing one of my routine patrols inside one of the office buildings. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get when a building meant for hundreds of people is completely empty. I was walking down one of the long hallways with my flashlight when my radio suddenly crackled. My partner told me that one of the camera feeds had gone black in a cubicle section toward the back of the building. He thought the lights in that area might have gone out. He asked if I could go reset the breaker. It wasn't unusual for that building. The breaker room was all the way in the back near the server area, so I turned around and headed that way. As I got closer to the cubicle section, something immediately felt off. It was completely pitch black. Not just dim. Completely dark. There were no service lights on. No glow from monitors or desk lamps. Nothing. It was like someone had shut off every source of light in that entire section. The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkness, but even that seemed weaker than usual. The air felt colder back there too, and the silence felt heavier. The breaker room was past the cubicles, which meant I had to walk through nearly 40 rows of them to get there. As I stepped between the first few rows, I slowed down and started listening carefully. That's when I heard it. A quiet clicking sound somewhere deeper in the cubicle maze. I stopped walking for a second and focused on the noise. It happened again, faint, irregular clicking. At that point I started wondering if someone had somehow gotten into the building. It wouldn't have been the first time we caught someone trying to break in around there. I continued forward slowly, keeping my flashlight aimed ahead of me. Then I saw something at the far end of the cubicle rows. A silhouette. It looked like someone crouched down between 2 cubicles near the back. My first thought was that I had just caught whoever had tripped the breaker. I immediately dropped to one knee and drew my firearm. Without saying anything, I keyed my radio twice, which was our signal to get ready to call 911. Then I started moving forward slowly. "Stand up," I called out. "Face me. Now." The silhouette didn't move. I repeated the command again, louder this time. Still nothing. At that point I stepped a little closer and aimed my flashlight directly at it. And that's when I realized what I was looking at. It wasn't a person. It was a clown decoration someone had placed between the cubicles, holding one of those tiny Charlie Brown-style Christmas trees. I just stood there for a second staring at it before letting out this nervous laugh. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. I holstered my gun and took a deep breath, feeling relieved that it wasn't actually an intruder. The whole thing had just been a stupid decoration someone forgot to take home. I walked up to it, figuring I'd just move it back inside one of the cubicles so nobody else had to deal with the same scare. And the second I got within a few feet of it, the thing suddenly lit up. Its eyes and nose started glowing bright red. And then it let out this loud, mechanical laugh. Bah-ha-ha-ha-ha. The sound echoed through the entire dark office. I'm not proud of this, but I immediately turned and ran. Full sprint. That thing caught me completely off guard and scared the absolute hell out of me. In my time working security, I dealt with all kinds of situations. We'd caught people digging through our dumpsters. We'd had someone try climbing onto the roof once. There had even been a shooting at an apartment complex nearby. None of that had made my heart jump the way that stupid clown did in that dark office. I didn't stop running until I got all the way back to the front desk where my partner was sitting. He looked at me like I'd completely lost it. When I told him what happened, he walked back with me and turned the lights on in that section. And there it was, sitting between the cubicles like nothing had happened. I worked there for a while after that night, and every single time I had to patrol that building, I made sure to avoid that cubicle section whenever I could, because for whatever reason, that clown decoration never stopped creeping me out. I've worked overnight security in a lot of different places over the years. Some of them were honestly pretty strange. I've done shifts at a halfway house, a microbiology lab that worked with things like Ebola samples, and even a testing facility where they handled everything from STD panels to newborn blood screenings. You'd think working around places like that would give me the strangest stories. But the weirdest night I ever had actually happened at a condo apartment building, and it also happened to be my last night working security. This was several years ago when I was working the overnight shift at a large condo complex. It wasn't a huge property, but it had multiple floors, underground parking, and a few shared spaces for residents. One of those shared spaces was a party room on the main floor that residents could rent out for birthdays or events. When it wasn't being used for parties, the room basically doubled as the security break room and the place where we changed into our uniforms before starting the shift. My shift that night started at midnight. Earlier that evening, before leaving for work, I had felt kind of strange. At the time I didn't think much of it. I just felt a little off, kind of foggy, like I couldn't focus properly. I know now that what I experienced was something called a simple partial seizure, but back then I had never had one before, so I didn't recognize it for what it was. By the time I arrived at the building and went inside, that strange feeling was still lingering. I remember walking through the quiet lobby toward the party room to get changed into my uniform. The building was completely silent, which was normal for that time of night. Most of the residents were asleep, and the only lights on were the dim overhead lights in the hallways. I opened the door to the party room, and immediately something felt wrong. At first I thought maybe the lights were playing tricks on my eyes because my head already felt strange. But as I stepped inside and turned the lights on, I saw it clearly. There was a huge pool of blood on the floor. Not just a small spill or smear. I'm talking about a dark red puddle that covered a massive area of the floor, easily 6 feet by 6 feet, maybe even bigger. For a second I just stood there staring at it. My brain wasn't processing it properly. I remember feeling confused more than anything else. Normally, if you walked into a room and saw that much blood, your first reaction would probably be panic. But because my head already felt off, my reaction was strangely delayed. I remember thinking maybe someone had gotten hurt earlier in the evening and maintenance just hadn't cleaned it up yet. Or maybe there had been some kind of accident during a party. The problem was, the blood looked fresh. It hadn't dried yet. The color was dark and glossy under the lights. And the room was completely empty. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. No sign that anything had happened there recently. At that point, the weird foggy feeling in my head got worse. Instead of trying to figure out what happened, I walked over to the couch in the corner of the room and laid down for a minute because I suddenly felt extremely dizzy. That's where my memory starts to fall apart. Everything after that point is just pieces that people later told me. Apparently at some point while I was lying there, I had what's called a tonic-clonic seizure. If you've never seen one, it's the kind where someone loses consciousness and their body starts convulsing uncontrollably. During the seizure, I apparently fell off the couch and hit my head on the floor hard enough to open up a pretty bad cut. Someone in the building must have heard the noise or found me during their patrol, because the next thing I remember is waking up with paramedics and police officers in the room. I was extremely disoriented. My head hurt and everything felt blurry and confusing. While the paramedics were helping me, I could hear the police officers talking to each other nearby. One of them kept asking where all the blood came from. At first I thought they were talking about the cut on my head. But then I realized they weren't. They were talking about the huge pool of blood that was already on the floor when I arrived. The strange part is, they didn't believe me when I told them it was already there. One of the officers actually said something along the lines of it being a murder amount of blood. That's when they started asking me questions like I might somehow be involved. But the truth was, I genuinely had no idea where it came from. My memory from that time was already messed up because of the seizure, but the one thing I was sure about was that the blood had been there when I first walked into the room. I kept telling them they should check whoever had been in the building before my shift started. As far as I know, they did look into it, but I never heard anything else about it after that night. No explanation. No report about an injured resident. No missing person. Nothing. The amount of blood in that room should have meant someone was seriously hurt, or worse. But as far as I know, nobody was ever connected to it. And to this day, I still have no idea where all that blood actually came from.